I decided to take myself off, Simon, to darkest Gloucestershire to see Forest Green Rovers in action against Colchester United. They won the game. Forest Green. They won it well. They won it by 5-0. And of course, you know, and I know, the man I sat beside, the owner of Forest Green Rovers, activist, campaigner Dale Vince. I sat with Dale throughout the afternoon. At Forest Green Rovers, Simon, and we'll get to this later on in the show, they would normally fly the Palestinian flag. They didn't at the weekend. They put out a short statement as to why they didn't, because of the out of respect for those who had lost lives on both sides of this current ongoing situation in the Middle East. Later on in the show, you're going to hear me in conversation with Dale Vince as to will they continue to fly the Palestinian flag? And when they do, will they fly the Israeli flag alongside it? And Dale Vince, of course, is a man who's used to being asked questions like that and answers them as honestly and openly as Dale feels he can. So you'll hear from Dale Vince later on in the show. But it's fair to say, Martin, the world has changed and is changing all the time with the current situation ongoing in the Middle East. And a row, Simon, as you will be well aware, began last week after the FA failed to light up the Wembley Arch in the colours of the Israel flag after the killing of a host of civilians by Hamas last weekend. And it was lit previously for victims of attacks in France, in Belgium, in Turkey and in Ukraine, but not on this occasion. So, Simon, where are we with this? After holding itself up as the moral arbiter of social and political issues, was there almost an inevitability that football would eventually walk itself into a moral quandary here?
Well, of course. Whilst I was away, I read a brilliant article written by Richard Littlejohn about this particular subject matter and about the challenges that are had with sport dipping its toe in, choosing its causes, working out what it thinks is important, how little skin does it have to put in the game. And he uses examples that I happen to concur with. That'd be a naive view now, given the nature of the way that society seems to think that sport needs to be leveraged this way, that sport should be for sport. And then it doesn't walk itself backwards into these conundrums. It doesn't walk itself into scenarios of geopolitical tensions or societal issues around the value of what sport should be used for. Sport was built and created for something else, not for those that wish to harness. It's becoming almost like agenda, tragedy, denotion of something. Oh, yes, and we'll have a side order of sport with that too. And I feel quite strongly, I know people use the example, oh, well, hang on a second, you're before the poppy. Poppy's a very different animal. Poppy was something about the liberation of everybody, the freedom of the oppression around the world, irrespective of ethnicity, culture, creed, sexual persuasion, whatever. These sort of things, I think that the football establishment, the various governing bodies of sport would be well served staying away from, because ultimately there's a lack of consistency. There is also a scenario of people don't really understand why they're involved in it, don't really understand the principles behind it to some extent. And the FA have shown their colours in this instance because, from the point of view of deciding that there was potential jeopardy attached to this, so we're not going to do this. That's why they shouldn't have done it for the Ukrainian situation. That's why they shouldn't have done it for other situations. It should simply be sport for sport's sake.
We'll get back to the poppy situation in a moment. The FIFA president, Infantino, last week, Martin, in a letter seen by Sky, called for the immediate end of hostilities and for the immediate relief of the suffering of people of both Israel and Palestine. He says football can bring a light of hope where there appears to be only darkness ahead. Is this an example of football overreaching what it believes it can achieve? In business, it doesn't really have anything to do with them. Geopolitical matters.
Absolutely. I mean, this idea that you feel as if that you can change the world by having a couple of football games and feel that there's just nothing but a feel-good factor about football. It's a crazy notion. And for Infantino to come in and say, stop all hostilities just like that, it's ridiculous, really. The point that Simon's made is a very, very good point. The FA should have stayed out of these things, because somewhere along the way, whether it be in 2 months' time or 6 months' time or a year's time, they're going to come up with something, as it's just arrived here, just at this very minute, that is going to be unbelievably confrontational, and that they're going to find themselves in a bit of trouble. My own particular view, for what it's worth, is that I think when the attack took place, first of all, and it was a shocking attack. There's no question about
absolutely.
it. Really shocking attack. Then, and of course, Israel have absolutely every single right to protect themselves and fight back. There's no question about that there. But I think had that in its isolation happened at the time, and then the game come up the following day, I think they would have probably put out. But then what's happened is the situation in Gaza has become so incredibly entrenched, really, at the end of it, and that they had to withdraw and sit back. Now, here's my point. I think, like Simon, they shouldn't do, but almost inevitably that football sport, in a sense, is automatically associated with. And I think the message might go way back to about 1968, when one of the most powerful messages ever,
Olympics,
really, was when Tommy Smith and his compatriot Carlos, I think it was, Carlos, had the black... It was so powerful, it was untrue. And I think that you felt that sport and politics were going to be entwined forevermore. And that was me.
But we saw the worst example, and I know this is very sensitive territory. If we ever saw a reason why sports and politics should never be intertwined, we saw that in the 1936 Olympics, by the way that the Nazis propagandised what they felt that they should impart the world with.
Absolutely.
So if we ever saw an example to the polar opposite of that, people like Gianni Infantino have got this Napoleon complex, or this idea about where they think they are in the world. I don't know if he thinks he's in some sort of Vatican state and has got the Swiss Guard that's going to implement his wishes. There's nothing, I think we know where his allegiances have been over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of his relationships with Middle Eastern countries that have caused us to have a little bit of concern about where he's positioning himself. Again, look, I understand.
Are you saying lighting up the Ukrainian flag on the Wembley Arch was wrong then?
I'm saying if you're playing against Ukraine in a game, I get it. But where does this stop? Where does it stop? When we were in the European Championships recently and we saw the Germans decide that they wanted to light up the Allianz Stadium with LGBT colours because the Hungarians had introduced new legislation in their country that they didn't want homosexuality taught in schools. Now, it's deplorable, right? And we accept that that's a backward society. But why in bleeding hell does football feel that it needs to ride on in and set itself up as the moral arbiter and also the judgment and also the position of creating influence? We are in a society where we can find out and form our views, and we can open the window and we can see what's going on. We can turn on 24-hour rolling news and evaluate our opinions. Surely we want sport to isolate us away from sometimes the dreadful challenges that the world brings and give us what it was created for in the first place, which was a removal from the challenges of life and an enjoyment.
But you make an exception for the poppy on the jersey.
Well, I tell you why I make an exception. I make an argument for that. It's because that has a very different connotation. I know that there'll be certain sections of society.
I was going to say, not everybody thinks that.
I know that the James McLean of the world will pop up and make their view and perhaps have social media pictures that they wish they'd never put out there themselves, which are rather immature things to do. But when we look at the 1914-18 war, the 1939-45 war, which was the liberation of everybody without persuasion, without bias, without sexuality, ethnicity, or any of those things, it has a far different feel to it than the scenario where geopolitics and the tragedies of the world and societal ills are being pushed into people through sport. I understand that people may have a different view on that.
You managed James McLean. He had a very different view, didn't he, Martin?
Yes, he did. Yeah, but James McLean has... I disagree with Simon in this one. James McLean, I don't know about what was sent out in social media. I wasn't into that there. But James McLean took a stance on the poppy.
Balaclavas and guns, Martin.
He took a stance on the poppy. And then, sorry?
Balaclavas and guns.
What word?
That's what James McLean put out on social media.
Oh, I do it, right, okay. But James McLean, this is what he felt at the time, and I'm sure he still feels the same, and he refused to wear the poppy, and that is entirely his decision. Absolutely.
And that's right,
and
too.
That is absolutely right. That is his decision to do that there. And James McLean, as a person that I know, McLean realised that he was going to take an awful lot of abuse, not only from away fans after that there, but from home fans and things that you see here, and yet he was prepared to do that. James McLean, as a person, has more courage in his little finger than I have in my whole body, believe it or not, honestly. And he took the stance and knowing what was going to happen in the future, and it did. And something that I'm not so sure whether I would have been brave enough to have taken a stance.
Should this now lead to the way that the FA has dealt or not dealt with this situation regarding the lighting up of the arch in the Israeli colours. Should the criticism of the way that football is dealt with the Israeli-Hamas conflict start, I don't know, a rewinding of the messaging process that it stands for in the past? Should it look?
Well, I'd like to think so.
Case by case now.
Well, I think it should focus on football and focus on sports. The tragedy of the Western world is we spend all our time self-flagellating and judging other people and can't help ourselves, and we use institutions like our sports to be able to impart that wisdom. I worry that, no, I don't think there'll be any lessons learned. I mean, it's great that people's hypocrisy and double standards are being pointed out and the ridiculousness of the cul-de-sac that the FA have walked themselves into. And the idea that sport is an antidote for people to take a break from these awful societal challenges, not something for you to continue to be confronted with it, and for sport to do it in its half-assed, haphazard way that it does it, making itself look ridiculous, arguing on the behaviour. I hate to use this expression because people find it a very repetitive one, but virtue signal their way through the world, because there's got to be substance behind your belief systems. We've seen it. I know I'm being a little bit pedantic about labouring the point about people taking yellow cards in the World Cup, but you either mean it or you don't. And again, if your leaders impart their particular brand of wisdom and they don't have a lot of substance behind that because they're too busy working about whether they should be in part of the ECG group, which is the equality, climate and governance parameters that businesses and things in this country seem to have to be rammed down their throat on a daily basis, what are you going to have?
But where'd you draw the line though, Simon? I mean, Arsenal, I think last season played in an all-white kit. And
I had that debate with you
as
then.
a show of strength against knife crime.
I had that debate with you then. I mean, I think football clubs can use their influence in many, many ways. I want to keep the pitch and that sort of environment solely for sport. If they want to take their brand and they want to go out as Arsenal Football Club and they want to go into community centres and they want to use role models in players like some of the boxers do, like Richard Riakporhe does, or Dan Aziz was talking about the other day, that take their lived experiences, to coin that expression, which I particularly loathe, but let's use it for the purpose of this conversation, and say to people the effects of knife crime, that's fine. When we start opening Pandora's box for every aspect, and they're not unworthy causes, they're not worthless. It's not worthless to suggest that the causes that were talked about, homeless last year when we were arguing at Christmas, and everybody thinks I'm the Grinch because I'm saying, come on now, we've got to get some control over this. We cannot have, because ultimately, how many causes will you to be able to participate in? So try and streamline the pitch experience to just about football. And if the players want to take their free time and the clubs and go and avail themselves of real skin in the game stuff, okay, fill your boots, be my guest, as long as it doesn't distract you from your core business.
Wait, it is such a thorny subject, Martin. Do you think football generally will start rowing back now when it comes to political messages?
That I don't know, but I think that they will have a think about it now, really, because, as I mentioned earlier, almost inevitably you're going to be led up a path of which, whether you were wittingly going in that direction or not, is something that they would have to rethink. And I'm with Simon in all those points. There are a lot of really, really great causes out there that actually can be enhanced by someone backing them in some aspect or another. But please, you don't go down a political route that you find yourself in serious trouble at some stage.
Well, you show support for some, Simon, you'll offend others. No, I mean, that's the bottom line, isn't it?
But it's also, there are very well-versed, very well-set-up organisations whose job is to be able to police and shine a light upon these things. Amnesty International, running around, but highlighting the challenges of the Qatari regime about the manner in which the cabals were put together, the working environment, the immigration or the treatment of immigrants, and so on and so forth. That's their job. Of course they want to use football. Of course they do, because there's millions of eyes on the prize around the world. It's incumbent upon football to say, or sport, thank you very much. We'll take the advertising revenue from the broadcasters, and if you want to impart your wisdom in the breaks, that's up to you. But we are about sport, and what sport represents is something different to the awful travails of other aspects of the world, that other organisations that are far more geared towards shining a light on that or effecting change, rather than weaponising half-baked ideas inside sport because people inside sport think that's the thing to do.
Yeah.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.